Scott.
Right now.
You lost your voice?
Shh.
They won't notice. We're Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. Normally, we're not 50% mute.
I'm not mute. I'm just, being silly.
Pardon me. February is Black History Month in the United States.
Yeah.
And a lot of booktubers are reading books by black authors.
Or participating in the Blackathon, or what's the other one called?
No idea. If you wanted to mention it, I could have researched it before we filmed.
Shut up. A bunch. We got a bunch.
We got a bunch. It's a butcher's dozen, 11, because butchers are stingy, unlike bakers who are champions.
It's a bunch of books by black authors that we think rock.
Alright, the first one on this list is Octavia Butler, Kindred.
Oh, such a good book.
Now, I like this book now, but you can love this book.
I did fucking love this book. It was awesome. So Kindred is science fiction-y, historical fiction-y, genre bending. It's the story of a black woman who gets sucked back into the past from the 70s to the 1800s in the South of America. Well, I mean, where she's obviously assumed to be a slave.
She has a link to her great-great-great-grandfather or whatever.
There's it's all about her heritage, and it explores sort of slavery and what it was like back then, and how far how much things have changed and how much things haven't changed, and the different forms racism takes in modern culture versus slave culture, all sorts of things as she pops backwards and forwards on this timeline.
I thought one of the best things that Octavia Butler did was make Dana's husband white and have him come back with her for a bit of it. I thought that allowed for so much intricacies and depth in the discussion.
So much. This is a wicked book just for the plot alone. It's fast-paced, interesting, edge-of-your-seat tension. The characters are just living people, and the themes and the ideas discussed in it are necessary and not overly intellectualized. It's an emotional read, it's a critical read, it is a wicked book.
Yeah, I think this is like a double win. If you read books just for the plot, and that is who you are and that's what you like, then this book is for you. And if you read books just for the literary analysis, then this book is for you. And if you, like most readers, are somewhere in between that scale, then this book is for you as well.
Yeah, I basically think this is a book that anyone who's not racist will get something out of. And I suspect if you're a racist, you'll find it a bit confronting. So read it. I just want to say that Octavia Butler in general rocks. So Kindred was my gateway drug, but I've also read The Parable of the Sower, and that is an excellent book to pick up too if you're looking for something a bit different. Parable of the Sower is about sort of a
post-apocalyptic world where the president of the time has the slogan "Make America Great Again."
Yeah, it's a little bit creepy.
It's clearly talking about like climate change, but from the perspective of somebody writing in, when was that written, in the early 80s?
Yeah, it's about climate refugees and the dissolution of sort of American societal structures and the creation of a religion, it is very interesting. A bit less plot driven than Kindred, but a super interesting discussion.
Yeah, His Only Wife by Peace Adzo Medie. This is a Ghana-Libyan author, and it is quite an interesting premise for a book. The protagonist of this book is betrothed to a man, and it starts off at her wedding day, and she has not met this man yet. And on her wedding day, when she marries the man, she still doesn't meet the man. She's then moved to the big city, and she's given this luxury apartment to live in, and taken care of. Meanwhile, she starts to hear stories about the man who she's essentially been pushed into the relationship with this man as an arranged marriage because the man's mother doesn't like his current wife, and they're trying to get rid of the current wife and replace her, and she doesn't know how she feels about that, and she wants to be his only wife, and she wants him to leave the other wife. Meanwhile, for a lot of this book, she doesn't even meet her husband. Anyway, this is a bit of a coming of age novel, and I think it is quite a powerful and interesting novel. It is set in Ghana, and it goes through some really interesting societal things that Ghana has. The idea that rich men can have multiple women, sort of an unofficial polygamy status, and some of the characters in it, in particularly the neighbour in this book, are very interesting characters. So I thought it was an interesting societal critique, this novel, as well as being a sort of empowering, uplifting coming of age novel about this woman who is shat on and learns to stand up for herself.
Yay!
Now the next one on this list I've got is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi.
Akwaeke Emezi is my favourite, I think.
It's very talented. They're a very talented writer.
Yes. I've now read 2 books by them, and Freshwater is my favourite. Freshwater is about a woman who is born as the host to various gods and has within her a pantheon, and how that impacts her decision making and her internal dialogue and her life. And it's an incredible book, and it's beautifully written.
Lots of depth, lots of layers, and the thing about Emezi's writing in general is that they know how to create layers, and they know when to give you detail and when to hold back on that detail and let your imagination fill things in.
I really loved in Freshwater this real visceral, emotional description of particularly movement and events that the central character was going through. And I felt like it gave Freshwater like a real driving, passionate force, and really connected the reader to the level of emotion that the central character was going through. And then I picked up recently the death of Vivek, and I feel like that power is really restrained, and there's a real pared back feel that is the polar opposite to what I experienced with Freshwater, that just really demonstrates that Akwaeke Emezi is in full control of what they are doing and is executing consciously to create an experience with each read.
They completely understand what they're doing. Well, I've read Pet, and Pet is Emezi's YA novel, and what I thought was really smart here is that we have a writer who is incredibly good at the literary fiction, at the layers and the themes and all these lovely things that we like to analyse. And when you're then trying to pare it back a bit, it would be tempting to put less of that in. And what was, I thought, really good about Pet is when Emezi decided to pare it back, they didn't reduce the themes. In fact, by paring it back, they added more themes, and by being vague about what was going on, they added more themes, and they made the bad in the novel much worse by just being vague about it.
The unnamed bad, that's a good one.
Yeah, it was, the bad thing that was happening was somebody was being hurt. We didn't know how, we didn't know what that meant. So we didn't know whether it was sexual assault or beating or psychological or...
Yeah, but that's almost like the unseen baddie in a horror movie. Like, that's way more scary.
Yeah, it was very, very clever. And then on top of that, just like the fun, silly of that novel, to make it like an adventure-y YA bit of fun.
So looking forward to it.
And by far the best YA book I've read is Pet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's 3 from Akwaeke Emezi. The next one on the list is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. So this is one that I've only read. You haven't got to it yet.
No.
This is an interesting novel. It's an intergenerational novel where essentially 2 women go down different paths in their life. One marries a slave trader and one is slave traded. So one woman stays in Ghana and the other woman travels to America. And then it tells the story of these 2 women essentially in a short story. And then it goes to their children and then their children's children and so on and so forth. And it is this intergenerational bunch of interconnected short stories. And characters from one short story appear in the next short story because they're obviously their parents or uncles or grandparents or whatever. And it took me a little while to get into this novel, but once it started to click for me that we were seeing how these generations changed, it gives Yaa Gyasi the ability to talk about individual issues within the black community and within race, like things like one of the characters can pass as white, but all the characters can't pass as white. So it's really good to be able to explore
lots of different things.
Exactly, and to compare the difference between being African American and being African, and
yeah,
and the almost the racism that exists between being African and being African American, and how they think of people differently, and then how white people think of them both, is quite an interesting topic. And this is an excellent novel, I think. Speaking of a sort of connected bunch of short stories,
it's really hard to go past Girl, Women, Other when we're talking about books written by black authors. This was the joint winner of the Booker Prize in 2019 and should have won it, on its own.
Bernadine Everisto. It's 12 interconnected short stories featuring different black women narrators. So interesting, so well done, so good. While Homegoing was intergenerational, Girl, Woman, Other was set in the one time frame. There's a little bit of historical stuff that happened, but essentially it's a portrait of 12 different black women that were all connected in some
way, not necessarily related, but somehow connected.
And it really gave us the feeling of the diaspora of blackness within the UK.
Also, there's a lot about womanhood. Each sort of story is girl, a woman, and then other, as in a non-binary or similar.
Yeah, there's lots of queer rep, lots of
Just the variety of experience when it comes to womanhood, when it comes to blackness, when it comes to, you know, inner city versus country living, all of those things. An incredible depiction of we are not a monolith, and yet here are the currents of bigotry and of racism and of, you know, gendered issues, all those things.
I essentially think that if you've read Homegoing and you haven't read Girl, Woman, Other, and you liked Homegoing, you should read Girl, Woman, Other, and vice versa. I think that the styles are really quite similar, and
I've read quite a few books that have done this sort of many interconnected short stories as a novel sort of format, and Girl, Woman, Other is the best example I can think of. The writing in it is spectacular. It was clearly created this way intentionally. Just an excellent piece of work.
The next one on the list is Trumpet by Jackie Kay. Now, Jackie Kay is an adopted black lesbian who I think is now passed away, unfortunately, and Scottish. And this is much more an LGBT book than it is a black book, but it is still a black book. And I think it's important that when we talk about black books, that we don't just talk about books that talk about race, that we talk about everything, that it's important to have black characters in every sort of novel, that we don't just talk about that one, which is a huge issue.
Yeah.
But it's important to go beyond that. And Trumpet is the story of this lady whose husband has just passed away. And when the body is taken to the funeral home, an examination of the body is had, and it is revealed that the husband is a woman. And essentially the whole time we've had this man who, you know, biologically a woman living as a man, so, you know, essentially a transgendered person who was living in a time when you couldn't have a bit of surgery and stuff.
Even if so, not all trans people choose to transition, and that doesn't make them less trans.
Yeah, but in a time before trans was a thing that people knew existed is probably a better way.
I mean, when is it set?
The 90s?
The 1890s?
The 1990s, maybe. It's actually quite an old book. It's not a modern book.
I just think you'll be surprised at how long transition surgery has been happening.
Oh no, I understand that, but I think that the prevalence of the idea of transsexuality being a thing is only improving, and there's a lot of people from our generation that sort of, when they say they realised they were trans, it was because they heard of the concept of trans and like, that's me, rather than like, so it's sort of like this like secret knowledge sort of thing that's becoming better and better known.
And the idea of how do you frame your identity if there's no word for your identity?
Yeah. So anyway, Trumpet is the story of this lady and how she deals with, and she's just got so much dignity and class the whole time as people are belittling her husband, and her son is so angry. I really didn't like the character of her son. Was just so angry at finding out her husband was that his dad was a woman, and and in the concept of like finding out that he was adopted, although he knew he was adopted, but
sounds like a brat.
Yeah, it was just this one character, this woman, was just had so much dignity and class, and was so accepting of her husband, and was a contrast to the rest of society, and
but also was the only person not surprised by the knowledge. So,
well, she knew.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't like everyone else is adjusting to learning what.
But we're talking
not
like
that it matters. Like,
it doesn't
cares.
But if you found out your dad was actually a woman, you might have some sort of emotional response to that. If you found out your neighbour, who you thought was a man, was actually a woman, you'd be like, "Oh, that's curious." Like, you know,
I just wouldn't give a toss. But that's a different society.
Yeah, and on top of this, the reason it's Trumpet is because our dead man is a jazz player, and quite a good jazz player.
Yeah.
So the next one, Nell, is River Solomon's The Deep.
I loved this. I think the central focus, while this is about mermaids, the central focus of The Deep is actually on multi-generational trauma and the need to process the trauma of your generations if you are a black person. The mermaid mythology from this centers on the idea that pregnant women were thrown overboard from slave ships and they delivered into the ocean, and that their unborn children then became the first mermaids. It's built on a mythology created by like 90s electro Afrofuturistic music. It's just an incredible piece of work. It's tiny book, packs a massive punch. I really liked The Deep last year, and I will be reading everything that River Solomon produces, I believe.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, if you can hear snoring going on, that's Bryn just here.
And the brown lump in the corner of the...
The brown lump, I don't have a weird growth on me, that's my dog. And he's...
He's cute snoring, it's fine.
Yeah, it sounds weird. Alright, the next one, I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that this is a black book, but The Count of Monte Cristo. So Alexandre Dumas' father was the highest ranking black general that the French army had ever seen. But anyway, The Count of Monte Cristo is an absolutely incredible book. It is often talked about as a book about revenge, and while that is true, it's also a book about the human condition and finding happiness, and our main character has the ability to exact revenge on the people that threw him in prison, and it's about the reason behind the choices he's made and what will make him happy and why it's important that he does what he does and all of this. So anyway, an absolutely incredible book. I think it has a reputation as one sort of book, and it delivers as that sort of book, but I think it is so much more than that. And if you've read other Dumas works, this is just superior to them. There's no other way to this is just much better than novels like The Three Musketeers and The Black Tulip, which are good novels, and I do recommend them, but
this is the one.
It's the one in the scope of what he is writing about, and he's not trying to do such grand things in his other novels. He's just trying to entertain in most of his novels, but this one, he's actually trying to do things, and he pulls it off really well, I think. And I think that this is one of the best novels ever written, in my opinion. Next on the list, we've got a double from Alex Haley here, because I've read Roots and you've read the autobiography of Malcolm X.
Yes, many moons ago, but it's still a book that I carry around in my little brain. You know, the ones that you remember forever and ever and ever and ever? It's one of those.
So it's essentially the life of Malcolm X.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's what it's about, but without having lived for that period, it's very visceral and very evocative of, you know, what's going on. It doesn't shy away from discussions about violence and violent techniques, and discussions about how we all think of Martin Luther King as a non-violent protester, but the reality is Martin Luther King used white violence against black people as a way to raise awareness, and while he advocated for activists to be non-violent, he put them in harm's way in order to create the biggest splash for the newspapers to try and achieve, you know.
I also think that you can't analyse Martin Luther King without analysing Malcolm X.
No, you can't. But I think this is a really good starting point for anyone who was not born yet, or who wants a better understanding of that era of civil rights activism and what was effective and what wasn't effective, and what the philosophy was behind the decisions made, and the religious influences, because there's a lot of that going on. Like, it's very interesting and very complicated, and a good starting point for learning.
And does it examine that myth of non-violent protest?
Not as much as you would like, but it is a starting point, yes.
Okay. Roots is the other novel that Alex Haley, or novel is the wrong word, the other book that Alex Haley is well known for. It is the second novel to appear on the New York Times bestsellers list by an African American after I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Yeah, okay.
And it is an intergenerational novel about eight families, about 8 generations rather, of Alex Haley's own family, starting in Guyana and ending in America, essentially. And our first character is a sort of a slave that is captured, and so we see his life in Africa and then his life in the US, and the shock that he went through, the little things like for example, he was Islamic in Africa, and then he's made a slave, and he has no trust that any of his food doesn't contain pork, because he can't speak the language. Nobody can speak his language, and he's given this food, and he can see people killing pigs, and he can see bacon everywhere, and he doesn't know whether it's halal or haram. So, like, it's just things like that are quite brilliantly done, and it goes over several generations, and it is a very brilliant novel. There's a bit of controversy around it, so after you finish reading it, do a bit of a Google of it. But as a novel, as a piece of non-fiction, it is an excellent work. As a piece of fiction, is an excellent work.
Yeah.
Don't analyse it as a piece of non-fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The next one on this list I've got down is Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This is a coming-of-age novel about a Jamaican woman living in London. And it's the story of her exploring her sexuality and coming to terms of what is normal. She at the start of the novel, she's dating a white guy, and they've broken up and are on a break, and she is not accepting that break is not going to end.
Right.
And she is depressed and heartbroken and fairly delusional, and she sort of has to deal with that. This sort of thing sort of affects her at work, and she is quite broken, and it goes through, she has, like, random sex with people. She ends up fighting with her friends over some very silly stuff. and it is this nice coming of age novel, but at the same time it explores racism. So Queenie has 3 friends, and they're of various different races. So Queenie is like Jamaican, and one of her friends is Ugandan, and another one of her friends is Jewish, and that sort of allows, again, this discussion that racism isn't even, and that people aren't a monolith.
Yep.
Comes into this novel as well.
The last one on our list is My Sister, the Serial Killer, which is... Oh, excuse me. I thought this was fun, even... so it's a bit twisted to call it fun. It's about the protagonist and her sister, who is a serial killer. And the lengths she goes to help protect her sister from the law, and sort of goes from there.
And what happens when her sister becomes interested in killing somebody that she's interested in dating herself.
Yeah.
I thought that this was the first this was like marketed as a bit of a literary fiction, and then it was marketed as a thriller, and I think this is an interesting novel because I definitely think it was more thriller than literary fiction, but it did have a literary fiction aspect to it. In essentially, it's saying a lot about gender roles in society in it, and I thought that was, I think it was an interesting novel in that it sort of pointed out that the way that we put books into genres can be detrimental to them, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is one of those ones that defies sort of categorization. I don't think it was very thrillery, but I don't think it was literary necessarily either. It was something else, and it was really interesting. The character portrait of these 2 sisters is the best part of the book, and there were times that it was just so funny, especially for anyone who's got a little sister who just won't fucking listen. Like, it's really... Oh, I laughed so much. But it was good, and I think weirdly lighthearted for something that's about serial killing. There wasn't too much gore and gruesomeness, if that's not your thing.
Yeah, I think that this is quite a whimsical novel, really, at heart, but not quite. And very different from basically everything else on this list. So, something for everyone, I hope. Yeah, a bit of fun, a bit of a change of gears. Yeah. So that's sort of a big list of books that we really loved by black authors. By no means an exhausting list of books that we've loved by black authors. Certainly not an exhaustive list of books that you could read in February for Black History Month, but we just wanted to sort of throw some ideas out there. What are you reading for Black History Month? Are you changing your reading habits for Black History Month? Who is your favourite black author? Yeah, I'd love to know who your favourite black author is. It's a really good question. Yeah. If you're new here, please remember to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Thanks. Love you. Bye. Bye. Where's that? There it is.